Hey, Emma.
Yes, Madelyn.
What do you call your strategy to get your favorite Queen cover band to play your favorite sort of heavy metal geared high fantasy Queen song?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Tactics. Ogre battle. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your didn't know any of these things were Queen songs host, Madelyn.
I'm your same host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. This week on the pod, we are talking about Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together, and Wild Hearts.
I just want to share that before this started, Madelyn was like, maybe I hate this joke, which I like the implication of every other joke she's told, because she's never said this before. She's very proud of.
On the one hand, yes. I thought about a last minute pivot to some kind of like, okay, it's Monster Hunter, but with ogres. But the new game isn't actually Monster Hunter, so it felt like a bridge too far.
Yeah.
I didn't want to. We're already going to be talking about, do people call it Mon Hun?
The game series?
There was one review that insisted on calling it Mon Hun throughout the entire thing. And I was like, I don't think that's a thing.
I think sometimes people write it that way, yeah. I don't think you would say it out loud.
Well, what a weird thing to think about. A universe where we all call it Mon Hun.
Love me some Monhun.
But we're not there, and we're not even going to get there, because Mon Hun is not on the agenda today. First up, Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together. I really like that subtitle. What a baller subtitle.
Isn't it great?
Like, and the fact that, again, like, if you didn't understand the joke at the beginning, that's fine. I didn't really understand it either. But all of the Tactics Ogre series, aka the Ogre Battle series, is like named after Queen songs. Because the director just like really loves Queen.
Yeah.
And was like devastated by Freddie Mercury's death.
Yeah.
Which, let's have more, I mean, not more untimely deaths of music stars.
Yeah.
Let's have more of that energy in games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. You shouldn't, like, meaning this entirely sincerely, don't put that much thought into your game titles. Just grab your favorite song.
And make sure Ogre is in there, too. It's a little better if Ogre is in there. Tactics Ogre is the game that I opted to play this time, because, as Emma can attest, I recoiled at Wild Hearts costing $70. I'm so supportive of places like charging more, but when I see it, I also like have a visceral no reaction to it.
To be fair, you're not exactly hurting for games to play, so I understand not wanting to invest $70 into a game that's going to be added to your eternal backlog.
I briefly, in looking up the multiplayer, there was like some kind of SEO bait nonsense website that made me think there was local multiplayer.
No.
And I was like, but there wasn't. No. There's not.
Well, you're going to have to get more into, online multiplayer, so.
I guess. I don't know. We can talk about Monster Hunter later, Madelyn. Talk about Tactics Ogre. What I was saying
I'm not even talking about Monster Hunter, Madelyn.
I know. But Tactics Ogre is the game I chose to play this time. I did almost, for the good of my backlog, say, no games this time. But then I said, okay, I'll be disappointed in myself. So I did get Tactics Ogre. I need to like stop my playing of it now so that I go back to Triangle Strategy so I don't lose track of which of the three faction, like, ethnically charged war things are going on. Mm-hmm. I think if I try to play them both at once, it will get very confusing.
Yeah, probably.
But I did play about the first, hour and a half of Tactics Ogre, which is nothing. I know. Of Tactics Ogre Reborn, to be clear. Which is not is the second remaster of the original Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together.
Yes.
That came out in 2022. We haven't fought any ogres yet, though.
I don't believe there are any.
It's just like Vampire Survivors, right? Like, there will never be ogres.
Yeah, just like that.
Same kind of game, too. That being said, knowing that there would probably be no ogres, I did name my faction McOgre, of course.
Good.
Didn't really feel like there was any other choice. Anyway, Tactics Ogre is originally a 1995 tactics role-playing game from Quest, originally for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System / Super Famicom, depending on your country, and then ported to the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, and then they remade it for the PSP in 2010, and now the new remake, Tactics Ogre Reborn, is out on like all modern consoles and computers.
It's a turn-based tactics game, which is different from, I think, most of the other Ogre Battle games, which are real-time tactics games. So there's actually like a full map with a grid, and you move around it, and you take turns fighting, as opposed to everybody just sort of going at once. And the first Ogre Battle is like it's just like a rectangle, and you have like units on multiple lines that do different things, as opposed to like moving your thing around like Fire Emblem, which was one of the like only contemporaries for this at the time.
Yeah. It was interesting to me that the director talked in interviews about part of the goal of this game being to make a less difficult take on Fire Emblem, which is hilarious now. I mean, I haven't played the most recent one, but it's hilarious thinking about how people perceive Three Houses compared to my brief experience of this game, which is like, ha ha ha, a less difficult Fire Emblem. Okay.
Well, I mean, Fire Emblem definitely had to be like, there's scales to it, but I think part of the reason that Awakening was able to serve as like a comeback for the series is because they introduced casual mode to make it more accessible.
I do have a Fire Emblem related question for you, actually, while we're on this. The old Fire Emblem games are not like isometric, are they? They're just like grids. Like grids.
I mean, good question.
I was hoping that you would remember, because I find isometric grids very hard to work with.
Yes, I think the GBA ones were just top down.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really have like, they were just like really like sprite work.
Yeah.
Units on the field. So yeah.
Well, this is me saying that in both Triangle Strategy and in Tactics Ogre, I spend a lot of time trying to hit the right buttons to get to the right square, because I'm stupid.
I think you could tilt the camera, at least in Triangle Strategy, to be fully
okay, but I then have to contend with my Switch being like, ooh, drift time to drift.
Well, that's another problem.
Yeah. Anyway, if you were wondering what the tactics in Tactics Ogre are all about, why, they're about the Isles of Valeria, where you, Denim Powell, and yes, that is intentionally a riff on denim, like jeans, which is unbelievable. Everything about anything named in this series is frankly unbelievable to me. Ogre Battle, Queen Song. Let Us Cling Together, Queen Song. March of the Black Queen, which is the subtitle of the first Ogre Battle, Queen Song. Denim, named after denim, like jeans are made of, to indicate that he's low class.
Of course.
Same thing with his friend Vice, which is apparently a take on Levi's, although you could have fooled me. I thought it was just a take on Vice seems like he's maybe going to be an evil guy. Like, also indicating that he's low class, because nothing says low class. I believe he's
going to besmirch the good name of Levi's.
Well, I know. Nothing says low class like Levi's. These business casual dudes out here. Anyway, you play as Denim. You've got a sister, Kachua, and your pal Vice. And you all are part of the Wallista people. I'm very new into this game, and there's a lot of lore, and also it's translated, I think, slightly differently across all of the versions. At least based on the Wikipedia synopsis versus the game that I am currently playing. But there's 3 kingdoms in these islands with a lot of tension between them, and the 3 of you are basically trying to rescue the Duke, and very quickly you do rescue the Duke, and then it becomes a huge battle of alliances and betrayal, etc., across these islands.
The director, Yasumi Matsuno, has become very known for like the sort of very high European style fantasy, but like, you know, like realistic fantasy, I guess is what I should say. Because after making, you know, the first Ogre battle and Tactics Ogre over at Quest Corporation, he'd move over to Square and make the other notable tactics game that is like this, Final Fantasy Tactics, and then make Vagrant Story, and then make Final Fantasy 12, which are all very much this vibe.
It's a shame Final Fantasy 12 more or less destroyed this man.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we're talking about this in the sort of like, haha, like it's high European fantasy, you know the drill. But one of the things that has made Tactics Ogre a real classic of the genre, and a classic of the genre that even before this remaster kind of re-upped it in the public consciousness, was very much something that was kind of like held up as an exemplar, even though it was, you know, 25, 30 years old.
I mean, both Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah.
Are like crown jewels of the tactics game aficionados.
And that's for this one, I mean, very much because, and you can see this if you read any of the reviews of Reborn from November, is that the story does hold up. Like it's serious, it's thoughtful, it's engages with the horrors and the gray decisions of war. It also helps in this version. There's no voice acting in the original, but wow, it's so striking how even in just the little bit of this that I've played is like, oh, this voice acting is a lot better than Triangle Strategy. These people sound like actors.
Yeah.
It's really a testament to, I guess, how few of these games that I'll say that I have played. But I also think that it's notable that the tactics genre is so niche. I'm going to be so interested to see kind of like what happens in the next, let's say, 3 years with this genre, given the huge success of Three Houses, given the release of Triangle Strategy, given everybody's obsession with HD 2D graphics, which notably this remake does not use. It'll be interesting to me to see if, like, is this the moment that the turn-based tactics game breaks out of it's just Fire Emblem and these Japanese series, but like no one has made a new one of these in 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of games or not. But at this one, it does feel to me much more like my experience of playing Triangle Strategy than playing Fire Emblem. The systems of how the turns work, I think, are a lot more similar in those two games than they are in even the sort of like old school Fire Emblems. It's not like it's your turn for all of your characters.
Yeah.
And then it's the enemy's turn for all of the characters. It's this, they call it the non-alternate turn system. So it's like you have your turn comes back around depending on what you did the last turn and how fast the character is and all of that stuff. So that's an adjustment for me. It's hard for me to get used. I feel like I've not like quite gotten used to that. I hate in both this and in Triangle Strategy, I have a hard time tracking like who's next.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Is the UI similar?
It instead of it being like cards down below, it's character sprites.
Oh, okay.
I've actually found this a little bit easier to deal with than Triangle Strategy. Triangle Strategy, I like cannot page through those cards to save my life. And in this one, I at least have sort of figured out how to do that, so that helps. But it's very much like if you played that game or read about that game, it's striking to me how similar they feel, and I think that's a testament to the impact of Tactics Ogre, to be perfectly honest. At least in the gameplay portion of it. But it is very much like, you know, you face your character in a certain way when it ends, and that makes a difference. And you can move and attack in either order, and you have skills, and yada, yada, yada. So in the admittedly very little amount of playing of this that I have done so far, the battle feels quite like that game. And I'm really conscious of myself as the meme of like, man who has played one tactics game. This has Triangle Strategy vibes. But, you know, I'll own that.
Yeah, I've been wanting to get around to the remake of Tactics Ogre, but I haven't had time. And I've been waiting for them to bring Final Fantasy Tactics up, so hopefully one day I can be someone who has played more than one. Has played more than Triangle Strategy.
I am a little bit intimidated, having engaged with it just a little and read about it in reviews, by all of the menuing that's going to be required.
Oh, I mean, that is just tactics game.
I guess.
For all the differences these have with Fire Emblem is all menuing.
Is it really, though?
Yeah.
I don't feel like in Fire Emblem there's quite as much, like... In this game, I have to, like, assign them skills.
Oh, well, there's, like... Is there classes and stuff in this one?
Yes, so there are classes. And that's actually something that's kind of interesting in that they've tinkered with across the 3 different remakes in a way that I thought was really interesting. Something I also thought was interesting about that is that they've gotten, like, the original team together for all 3 of these remakes, which is weird.
Well, I read a little bit that, like, they made the remaster of Final Fantasy 12, and, like, it did well enough, and they were happy enough with it that they were like, wow, we could do Tactics Ogre like this, too.
It's fascinating to me because usually when something is being remade, the discourse around it is like, well, it's been handed off to this other studio and they, like, ruined it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to me to see, not only is this a game that gets, like, more or less glowing praise across all of its remakes, across, like, 30 years, right? But it's not quite 30 years. Came out in 1995. Not quite 30 years. But across almost 30 years. Yikes. But is, like, you know, they have these, like, same people who are continuing to, like, tinker with it and iterate on it. So, like, the class system in the original game is sort of like the new game that is here now, in that like, you can just sort of, like, flip between classes at will with your characters, more or less, if you're willing to do all the menuing to do it, and it's the characters that level up. But in the PSP version, they did something funky where it's like, it's your classes that level up. So, like, all of your archers are level 12 or something like that. All of your clerics are level 14.
It's interesting.
So you can, like, switch people to, like, different classes, and that affects their level. It's super weird.
That does seem like it would give you some interesting flexibility in, like, what units you could bring with you.
But I think it does. I think in both ways it does that. Because if you can just, like, switch your unit's class more or less at will, then it's like it's almost the same thing but in reverse.
Yeah.
I also think that they have their, like, party level system is cool, and solves something that can sometimes be a little bit, like, frustrating, grindy in these games, in that everybody gets all the experience in a battle. There's no, like, you sat in a corner the whole time so you don't get experience.
Right.
And there's a party level cap. So it's like your party level will be, like, 15. And so that means that no one in your party can go above level 15 until you advance the story more. I was like, oh, that's creative. That's a creative way to kind of solve the problem of, well, I think of it as like the Pokemon problem, right? Like the bait and switch Pokemon problem of like, okay, we've got to level up like the little units.
Right.
But I think there's still some of that. It's like you can still recruit new units late in the game who will join your party at level 1, and it's like, oh, that's rough. But I hadn't seen anything like quite like that in, again, the one tactics game that I've ever played. So I thought it was a cool solution to how do you make sure players don't ruin your game by grinding too much. Yeah. The story is apparently inspired by Yugoslavia in the 90s, which is certainly a unique gaming influence.
Seems like it was influenced by a whole bunch of
very dark historical moments.
Yeah. Notably, at least they've cited only ones like pretty far outside of Japan, so that's nice, I guess. Well, complicated in some ways, but in other ways, like, at least they're not doing this is about Korea thing that you sometimes run headfirst into in Japanese media.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like they're just like, this guy's just like a history buff. Which good for him, you know?
I don't know if you encountered this in your reading at all, where they were talking about, I went to the Ogre Battle page expecting there to be a lot more games, basically, because they talked about the first one, Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen, as being the 5th chapter in the Ogre Battle series. And then they were like, okay, Tactics Ogre is the 7th chapter. And that was confusing to me. I was like, what's happening here?
I don't know what's up with that either.
It sounds like there should have been more Ogre Battle, and there wasn't, basically.
Yeah.
Do you think this remaster, I guess, closer to remaster than remake, is going to signal more Tactics Ogre in the future? Tactics Ogre.
I don't know. Matsuno seems like he's been struggling since for a while. In my research, I got very distracted by the whole Unsung Story Kickstarter debacle situation, which sounded awful. So, it does not seem like he's doing, great. He's been writing some, like, Final Fantasy 12 related Final Fantasy 14 quests, and that's, like, about all he's been doing. So I don't know how likely that is. But it does seem like there is a resurgence of tactics-based games right now. Between, like, the Front Mission remakes they're doing, Advance Wars finally escaped its purgatory hell.
Those are two different things.
What?
Purgatory and hell, two different things.
Is it, though? Is it? Really?
It's very, very Sartre of you.
But that's not the point. Is that it does seem like there's a lot of, like, older tactics games being brought back right now. And, it probably what's next would be Final Fantasy Tactics for Square.
I guess they own all of this now, so you're right. There's no reason. It's interesting to me, though,
they do not own Advance Wars was the one example that wasn't Square. Yet. No, they don't seem very interested in buying things right now.
It is interesting to me, though, to think of, like, a turn-based tactics RPG is not necessarily a game where I'd be like, yes, this is the work of an auteur. But Tactics Ogre, that's a little strong, that wording. But it does seem to rely heavily on this one man's sort of, like, storytelling vision for its success. And again, with the big caveat that, of course, that's an oversimplification of how the game development works and game writing works. But it is hard to imagine them being like, yes, we're going to revive this series, which we have only ever worked on with this dude, even when we were remaking a game that came out 27 years ago. We're going to make a new one, but, like, not with him.
Yeah, it seems more likely, like, stuff like Triangle Strategy, which I think sold pretty well. Or at least they haven't come out and said that it's a disappointment, so I assume it did fine.
Wait a couple months.
And that is so clearly inspired by, like, that sort of lineage, so it seems like they would be better off, like, making new IPs that are tactics things or using this Triangle Strategy IP.
It is such a... Continue. And I'll let this take us into our new game here. But that is such an interesting consequence of Square owning so many of these properties. Is that, there's no reason for them to, like, compete them against each other. And in fact, they're probably already doing too much of that as it stands.
They're just doing too many games.
Right. That's what I mean.
And the last thing I wanted to say is the character designer who works with Matsuno a lot is Akihiko Yoshida, who since working with Matsuno on everything from Tactics Ogre to Vagrant Story to Final Fantasy XII, did the Nier, has been working on, started from doing the Nier character designs since Automata. So
not as many
that's
butts
a fun
in
fact
this
for
one.
me.
In case anyone, not as many butts in this one, in case anyone's wondering. So, and that got you excited if you were like, butt tactics. Sorely mistaken. No butts yet. I could be wrong. Maybe the butts are coming.
Never know.
I did like speaking of the character designer, last anecdote, I did like the anecdote that apparently the director Matsuno wanted him originally to design these characters to look like Hollywood actors. Like Kevin Costner's name came up. And the character designer was like, I actually won't do that. And drew original designs. And
is Kachua the one in the, like, black dress that's on the cover of most of them?
I haven't really looked at the covers of them, but I would guess that she would be, unless there's some other significant woman character who's going to appear.
I'm just saying, no butts, but that is a very Nier Automata core design. That's all.
It is very near. I can't argue with that. Let's talk about Wild Hearts.
All right, let's talk about Wild Hearts.
And I'll try not to talk about Monster Hunter the whole time.
That sounds good.
It's very hard. Speaking of, like, other games, speaking of not this, before I talk about this game, let's talk about one more other game. Really hard for me to talk about this game without, like, getting, like, the Sayonara Wild Hearts kind of music going in my brain.
It literally, the Wikipedia page literally says, don't get it confused with Sayonara Wild Hearts.
Really don't. It is not the same.
Yes. Wild Hearts is a action role-playing game. It's in the Monster Hunter genre. There
needs to be a cooler name for that, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta come up with something. There's a lot of video game genres that are just, like, title of other game. There's the Metroidvanias.
But that's a cool name. Metroidvania is a cool... Like, it's stupid.
But, like, I think, like, first-person shooters used to be called, like, Doom clones for a while. So, it's a Manhunt clone, sort of. Without being disparaging.
Yeah. It's tough when the series that you're cloning already has, like, Monster Hunter would be a pretty good genre name for this, but it's the game, so it's tough.
Little man versus big creature genre. You're just a little guy genre.
Does that make Shadow of the Colossus a Monster Hunter? Like,
it kind of is, yeah, actually. Proto Monster Hunter.
Love that.
Anyway, Wild Hearts, developed by Omega Force, most known for Dynasty Warriors, and published by EA under its EA Originals label. You're a little guy who's going around in a world called Azuma, It's not, unlike Monster Hunter, it's not an open world, but like there's like big area chunks essentially. And you're going around hunting kimono, just to do your hunting stuff, helping characters. There's not a huge plot here in a similar way as Monster Hunter. Mostly the point is you're going around and hunting some big kimono.
Mostly what I picked up from reading about it is that in Monster Hunter, it's generally like there's a big monster that's kind of causing all the monsters to invade on your territory. And in Wild Hearts, it's like humans have caused an environmental disaster. And so the monsters are invading on your territory. That's the distinction.
Okay. Understood.
Pretty light in how that actually plays out in terms of what you experience in the game. But that's what I picked up.
So the gameplay is, if you're familiar with Monster Hunter, the basics are pretty similar. The reviews I read basically said it's a little bit faster. So it's got like a touch of more character action feeling versus like the more sort of solidness of Monster Hunter combat. So you're like a little faster with these beasts. And you also can have fun weapons, like a funny little umbrella that has knives on it.
At least one review had very negative things to say about the umbrella.
But it's so funny looking.
I know.
It looks like it'd be fun. You spin it around.
They were like, whatever. The parrying window is brutal.
Okay. Well, that's the punishment for using umbrella, But the big distinction between Wild Hearts and Monster Hunter is there's this mechanic called karakuri, which is sort of like Fortnite building, basically. You have these things called threads, and based on the number of threads you have, you can create structures. So like boxes that you can stack on top of each other, so you can go up there and like jump off them to do like an overhead attack, or like launchers that you can launch things. And if you, how launchers do, and you can like combine different numbers of these to make something else. So like if you combine like 6 boxes, you make like a big wall that will stun the monster if it runs into it. Or if you put 3 launchers on top of each other, it just turns into like a big hammer that just like bonks the monster. And stuff like that. So you're sort of combining like, actual fighting and also being able to sort of manipulate the environment during combat by building things. This building also plays a part in traversal. So when you actually go to an area at first, like one area, it'll be pretty empty. But you can sort of single person, the review I saw was like, it's sort of Death Stranding feeling of like, without like the multiplayer aspect of like, you find places where you can unlock being able to place different structures around the place. So you can make your own like little campsites, or you can place zip lines around to make things easier to get around places that you can go up and down the zip lines. It's very cool. And so by the time you leave, you've like left all of your structures here, and it's become much easier to get around everywhere before you go to the next area and do it all over again.
So adding even more of like a colonial element to Monster Hunter is already somewhat troubling. Like, animal murder.
I guess so.
Excellent.
You're not like building civilizations, to be clear. You're putting down like your tent.
Right, like space junk. Yeah.
Sure.
Ever since you brought this up for that like one demo we played at PAX, I see it everywhere. I'm like, oh, everything. We're ruining the environment in these games. I'm throwing boxes everywhere and nobody seems to care.
Yeah. That one game we played that was called Scorchland, so nothing as egregious as that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just saying, I see it now and it's your fault.
I'm sorry.
One of my new things and it's your fault. As you probably picked up, this is sort of set in like fantasy feudal Japan. which is interesting because while Omega Force is best known for the Dynasty Warriors series, especially outside of Japan, they've also developed a series previously called Tokiden, which is also a Monster Hunter-like set in like an early Japan or early pseudo-Japan. So it was interesting to hear them talk about, I mean, like reading between the lines of this, it's obviously this like, well, we have EA as a publisher, so we're not going to do like Tokiden 3. Like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Why would we do that? But it's interesting that it's, you know, on one hand, you read about this and everyone's like, it's the Dynasty Warriors team. And it's like, well, why would the Dynasty Warriors team make a Monster Hunter like? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But they seem to be consciously trying to create another pillar to their business model as they talked about it, and consciously trying to reach out to Western audiences in particular through this EA publishing thing.
I also read they did provide some development support on like Neo. So like looking at that also reminded me of Neo a little bit. That one's more Souls-like, but Monster Hunter and Souls-like have some shared DNA as well.
Definitely. The timing of
you
it
definitely
all
fight some. It's the you're just a little guy genre, like I said.
Yeah. But speaking of that, and as a genre, tell me if and maybe you may not know the answer to this question either, so that's fine. But as someone who, I really thought Clickbait Boyfriend would love Monster Hunter, and then he tried it and he hated it.
Yeah.
So is that being my like only experience with the Monster Hunter genre beyond reading about it? It's my impression that Monster Hunter more or less has cornered the market. Like, there's just not that much on Monster Hunter.
There's not. You're right that there currently aren't that many Monster Hunter likes. Yes,
but it's so interesting to me.
There weren't that many like Souls likes until Souls got popular. You know.
But hasn't Monster Hunter been wildly popular for a long time now?
I don't know that actually.
At least in Japan.
I don't know if it's wildly popular or just normal, sort of niche popular.
Maybe I'm conflating the like depths of obsession with it with breadth of obsession.
I mean, it was in, it was in Tar.
I just feel like people who are into Monster Hunter are like really into Monster Hunter.
Yeah, I do think that. Yeah.
So it's interesting to me, and it, like also juxtaposed with our conversation about turn-based tactics. It's interesting to me that this feels like a notable, like, oh, somebody else serious is making one of these games.
Yeah.
Like especially.
I also think it is like this is a difficult game genre to do.
Yeah.
Like just continuing the Souls-like comparisons, like FromSoft can just copy paste a boss like 4 times into a game and nobody cares.
Yeah.
But you can't really, like, part of the appeal of something like Monster Hunter is like all the different types of creatures are like very different from each other, and so you would approach the hunt very differently for each one. And so that requires a lot of design, like complicated design work
right.
and implementation work that maybe is not, and animation work and all this other stuff that is a big undertaking to try to do.
So you're saying that because they got in early and they have, I actually don't know when the first Monster Hunter came out, but let's assume decades of like content and things to iterate on here, that it's hard for anyone to catch up given that the scope that people now expect from something like Monster Hunter World, like you have to have a publisher like EA to even attempt a coup here. That makes sense.
2004, by the way.
Okay, decades. That's decades. That's 19 years.
Yeah.
I did want to ask a question that to you too that came up in some of these reviews, is that the director Kotaro Hirata talked in at least one review that was quoted, or one interview that was quoted in a bunch of places, but potentially in more than one interview, about how they particularly designed the monsters in this game with the goal of avoiding something that's like a pretty common apparently experience in playing Monster Hunter, which is the like, oh, I just killed this like beautiful animal and I feel a little bad about it. And so they like intentionally tried to design them so you feel more like you're battling nature and they're like scary. But I sort of wondered in thinking about that, I was like, I don't know, isn't that little bit of melancholy like maybe part of what makes Monster Hunter like good?
I don't know. I don't understand the appeal of Monster Hunter very well myself, so...
You kill big monster, and then you cut it up and you make more tools, then you kill a bigger monster. That's the appeal, Emma. Numbers go up. Surely you can understand numbers go up.
Well, I mean, the reason I thought a clickbait boyfriend would like Monster Hunter is because he liked Horizon Forbidden West, and I bounced so hard.
He liked Horizon Zero Dawn. He's
whatever.
Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Forbidden West.
Sorry. I bounced so hard off like the hunting mechanical monster thing because I just did not get it. But if he liked that, I thought maybe he would like Monster Hunter. But for me, I didn't like that, so I don't think I would like Monster Hunter or Wild Hearts very much. I like the crafting thing, though. I think that's fun.
We're still kind of like chiseling out Emma Core over here, listeners. It's not Monhun.
No.
Not Emma Core. I did like, there was one Polygon reviewer who was like, I realized many hours into the game that I could have been petting the small animals instead of killing them.
Yeah. Yeah, the non-hostile animals you can pet. Unfortunately, sort of showing I think the like ambition of trying to make a game like this, even with an EA backing, the one thing that's bringing like reception of Wild Hearts down is it does have some pretty bad technical problems of just like in some places environments are just kind of ugly and there can be pretty bad performance issues. Apparently worse on PC than on PS5 or Series whatever.
The current Xbox family. You have one. You should know.
Well, yeah, but I mean the Series S is a lot less powerful than the Series X, so I assume it runs worse on the S.
Nice.
I just have it's just like a little baby box here, you know. Which for a game like this where you're fighting like a big old monster, that sort of stuff does matter. It's not the prettiest looking game, although really neither is Monster Hunter, some of them. But
this will reveal my total lack of technical knowledge. It's always baffling to me when the PC version of something runs worse than the console version.
I do think some of it is, I was reading some stuff about this. This is like a whole other topic, but like, Japanese developers especially aren't super comfortable with PC. For various reasons. I was reading this whole thing of like, people, they're like struggling in like the PS3 generation because like stuff like Unreal didn't have very good Japanese documentation. And like systems that they were using were like bought up and closed, like modeling systems that were very popular in Japan.
Oh, yes.
And I think that just the move to a lot of games being on PC also was just like during that time. And they just sort of missed it. This is obviously hugely generalizing.
Right.
The Western developers could also make awful PC ports, as shown by The Last of Us Part 1 recently.
But it's interesting that so much of what fed into that was like random little quirks of like, yeah, like the documentation was bad or a certain company closed, and that was even more of a hurdle. Well, speaking of things that are interesting to think about, do you want to try to mash up these games?
Let's do it. What, you fight an ogre?
Yeah, you fight a giant ogre turn-based. It's a little tricky, right? Because like the core gameplay is in many ways not mash-upable, right? Like the core gameplay of Wild Hearts and that whole genre is like you are very carefully learning the monster's behavior and like timing your attack accordingly, right? And the core gameplay of Tactics Ogre is it's turn-based.
Yeah. So I've been playing I finished the Fire Emblem Engage DLC without any specifics. The last map of it is like there's a big enemy, big guy, as is wont to be the last map of many Fire Emblem games.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's like a bunch of like islands connected to each other, and every few turns, the boss will destroy the island that it's currently on and move to the next one. So you have to be moving off that island at the correct times in order to keep your forces alive. So I'm thinking like, you have like a sort of turn-based thing, and there's certain patterns to like the big guy's attacks, right? That you have to respond to so that you can only like attack on certain turns, or you have to, stay out of a certain zone on certain turns. So you can sort of ape like attack patterns, and also like careful timing situations, I think, with tactics gameplay.
So just like a really, really, really hard tactics game is what you're proposing, I think.
No, I think just more like a tactics game that is more focused on defeating a big enemy versus like lots of small ones.
And you could definitely, like, the inventory management is very much core to both of these games.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely, like, the menuing will definitely be there and strong, and, like, bringing the right items with you. I do think one thing that loses a little bit, well, I don't know. Like, I get Monster Hunter must have replayability, right? But one thing that loses a little bit is, okay, it sort of seems like there's more or less one correct solution of how to defeat the boss. Maybe I'm just saying that because, like, I'm dumb. Like, and I like, if the game was creatively designed, it wouldn't just be like, yes, I have to figure out how to, like, attack on the third turn each time with my cleric.
Yeah.
So you'd have to have a lot of weapons and skills and stuff that you could use that could, like, affect these cycles. Maybe.
It'd be fun to bring in, like, a building element to it somehow, too. I don't really know how you would do this. There's, like, one guy in Triangle Strategy that can, like, build you, like, ladders and stuff. So maybe you have, like, a bunch of, like, builders that can make you, like, structural supports. So you can get, like, over top of the monster or something.
Yeah.
But you could add stuff like, that can get destroyed, and then your character has a big ol' fall.
So with that in mind, then I think the art style and the just display style probably can't be like the Pixel. I feel like it's gotta be more of a sort of semi-3D, at least, situation. I'm just thinking of, like, the nightmare of being like, I have to get up on the Hydra's back, for instance. And, like, if you try to do that in, like, an isometric 2D thing with building, feels like, okay, maybe we try to build in some light 3D to this.
Okay, yeah.
Just so I can make it more expensive and more difficult, basically.
Yeah.
And because I hate the isometric grid, and I will not include it.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good mashup. It's pretty good.
I think, like, I think maybe the creativity would come if you'd make, like, it wouldn't just be like, you have one battle and then the game's over.
Right.
But you have to make a lot of, like, different big monsters with different
One last
gimmicks.
question about this mashup. What's the story like? Obviously, Tactics Ogre is very story, and Wild Hearts is very not story. So where do you think this lands?
I mean, I think that you can't do a tactics game anymore without, like, some semblance of a story happening.
Yeah.
So I think you'd have to lean more on the story side. Maybe it's like... Oh yeah, one of the other examples from the Wild Hearts creators was one of them had worked on the Attack on Titan games, which I thought was really funny. It's Hirata.
Yeah. Okay, I see where you're going.
But
with this.
yeah, like fantasy, like, well, Attack on Titan is fantasy, but like fantasy Attack on Titan.
Yeah, I like that, and I think you're definitely, sort of given the like many things on the menu for Wild Hearts at any given time, like that could definitely feed into like a branching paths thing, and like the you're destroying these like big, you have to choose which of the big monsters you're going to destroy, right? And are you destroying the river spirit or the air spirit? And how does that destroy your people? You know what I mean? Like, that's stupid, but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wow, pretty good mashup, Emma. Did you prepare this in advance?
No. I still don't really know how the building would work, and obviously it would take a lot of creative designing to make a bunch of these that are fun. But it could be something.
It could be indeed. Well, listeners, have you ever called Monster Hunter Monhun? Are you one of the legions of Tactics Ogre fans who were thrilled to see it come back and are waiting for Tactics Tuger to come out? Do you feel like that's the mashup, or do you wish we'd gone the other way and had, I don't know, like a real-time European, pseudo-European monster hunting thing instead of a feudal Japan? We could have gone that way too. But if you have thoughts on any of that or anything else we talked about this week, visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But if you have thoughts about this episode that you actually want to share, as opposed to learning more about the podcast, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. Finally, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, anywhere that you can find podcasts. Wherever you found the podcast today, subscribe to Talk This. Next week it's Emma's side quest.
Yep. We'll come up with something.
Look forward to it. But in 2 weeks, what are we talking about?
In 2 weeks, we are talking about Skies of Arcadia for the old game.
Mm-hmm.
And Tunic for the new game.
Oh man, I've been meaning to play Tunic. That's bad.
I'm so sorry, Valen.
Well, I'll finish a game someday. That's not true. We're almost finished with Trine 3. Can you believe it?
Yeah, you're burning through those Trine games. You were finishing games.
Trine. It's garbage. Anyway, listeners, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a good sign-off?
This week, I hope that your knife umbrella serves you well.